Part 2. Along their migratory routes, monarch butterflies stay nights in certain trees. The, quote, butterfly trees, end quote, as they are called, are carefully chosen, although the criteria exercised in their selection are not known. Species are unimportant, obviously, for at one stopover, the roosting tree may be a eucalyptus, at another a cedar, or an elm. But, and this is what is interesting, they are always the same trees. Year after year, whether moving south or returning north, monarchs will paper with their myriad wings at twilight a single tree that has served as a monarch motel 1,000 times before. Memory? If so, it is genetic. For you see, the butterflies who journey south are not the ones who come back. Monarchs lay their eggs in sunny climes, then they die. The hordes that flutter northward in spring are a succeeding generation. Yet, without hesitation, they roost in the same trees as did their ancestors. Scientists have examined butterfly trees and found them chemically and physically identical to the trees surrounding them. Yet no other tree will do. Investigators have camouflaged the tree's color, altered its scent. The monarchs were not fooled. Another of nature's mysterious constants. A butterfly always knows when it is there. They found the zoo site on October Sunday, a soft, burpy day on which they crossed many bridges over rivers and bridges over sloughs. The sky sagged like an udder. The air had a feel of heavy birds. Their motorcycle was a flash of overheated color in the damp green landscapes. At 70 miles an hour, it whined like a spinning top and rattled Amanda's kidneys like dice in a box. Amanda had peed in Seattle, she had peed in Everett, and now they had sped through the Skagit River Valley. She had to pee again. Already, she and John Paul were far behind the caravan that motored to Bellingham, near the Canadian border, where on the campus of Western Washington State College, the circus was to unfurl its canvases for the last time. But when she wrapped her coat on Ziller's ribs, he dutifully braked the BMW and turned into the big fur-ringed parking lot of Mom's Little Dixie Barbecue. Luckily, Amanda's biological urgency became manifest on that rare stretch of Interstate 5 where the limited access rule had, for some reason, been suspended. Along that 15-mile section of Seattle, Vancouver Freeway between Everett and Mount Vernon, there were scattered gas stations, general stores, and restaurants. Not many, however, for this was farming country of almost unequaled lushness, and the black juicy soil was far too valuable to be relegated to commerce. The motorcycle engine died with a prolonged series of soft, smoky gasps, like a dwarf choking on a burning rag. The couple dismounted, only to discover that Mom's was closed. Not shuttered for the Sabbath, but permanently shut down, padlocked, vacant. In cobweb-frosted window corner, a faded "For Rent" sign hung by one ear from a snipping of tape. So, while his young bride went around back to water the ferns, Ziller scrutinized the roadhouse, noted its spaciousness, its quaint but sturdy construction, the broad fields behind it, the grove in which it sat, and surmised that it would be a likely edifice in which to house a zoo, a family, and secret world headquarters. "I am always voyaging back to the source," Ziller had said. He was a sorcerer. Internally, he pursued the bright waters of his origins with whatever vehicles he could command. "In our human cells are recorded every single impulse of energy that has occurred since the beginning of time," Amanda had said. "The DNA genetic system is the one library in which it is really worthwhile to browse. Although he never said as much, Ziller seemed to find the key to that library in various mental disciplines, in capsules, powders, symbols, songs, rituals, and vials. Externally, the source search proceeded on a more obvious level. Ziller had pilgrimaged several times to Africa, place of his birth. Now it was time to re-assimilate the Pacific Northwest that rained on clam-chawed land where he had lived his childhood, although it could be said that considering his books and films and daydreams and maps, he was, quote, in Africa and, quote, all those child years too. Or was it India? When Amanda returned, John Paul clasped her suspiciously moist fingers and led her across the freeway. Traffic was sparse, and there was little danger of their being struck to the edge of a lemonade-colored slough. Clouded with eelgrass and driftwood, the slough curled forlornly through the cropland like a moat that had been abandoned by its castle. The newlyweds stood with their backs to the water, stood to the muddy shoulder, and gazed across 4 lanes of asphalt at the cafe, its 2-story cowboy Gothic facade silhouetted against the God's belly clouds like the fortifications of a forbidden city. Amanda squeezed her husband's hand. She knew that they were there. In the wash of the afternoon, they perceived dimly that once, before the paint began to flake, the wood-frame facade of Mom's Little Dixie had been festooned with cartoon pigs, all wearing chef's hats and carrying steaming platters of barbecue and buns, which caused Amanda to announce that she could never trust a pig that sold pork sandwiches, which prompted Ziller to point out to her the parallels between such swine and businessmen everywhere. On Monday evening, October 7, the Indo-Tibetan Circus and Giant Panda Gypsy Blues Band offered its final performance, and a rather good performance it was. Stimulated by sentiments of finality, in a short while, nearly normal Jimmy would be taking the band to New York for a recording session, and the troopers realized that the circus would probably never be reorganized. Each performer uncorked hidden geysers of adrenaline and functioned at the summit of his potential. Krishnalasa balanced himself on one thumb atop a 25-watt bulb for 60 seconds, or was it atop a 60-watt bulb for 25 seconds? Master Ying swallowed, and disgorged unharmed, 6 frogs instead of the usual 2. The monkey pipers blew until their faces turned black. Jugglers called for sharper blades, taller lampshades, additional marbles. With what clarity Elmer sang the Bhagavad Gita, the song Celestial, the ecstasy of the Divine One. Pursued by a gang of drooling Amazons, the sugar-breasted Pammy led her yaks and goats to safety through the tunnel of Hades. The audience gasped as she braved the fire. Clowns were stuffed into their suits like sausages. White mice dropped by toy parachutes from the wings of model airplanes. One mouse broke a leg and was carried off in a tiny ambulance manned by a crew of parakeets. In the center ring, a collection of paradoxes was exhibited. Deja vu displays, infinity chambers, firecrackers, chants, cave paintings, symbologies, obscurities, meditations, inscrutabilities, Zen yo-yos, kabuki cutouts, visions from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, nuclear Phyllis roaring her scooter in and out among the blues chords, looking for the peace that passeth all understanding, and so forth. All this time, Amanda lay napping, wrapped in a bulky tapestry. Outside her teepee, a dank October breeze raised goose pimples and flagged flags. The insect yammer of the crowd squirmed through the woven walls. Even into sleep, the music followed her. She could hear her husband drumming as if freed from all the fetters that bind men to life. If she did not visibly respond, it was because she was exhausted. Long, insistent lines had formed before Amanda's booth that evening, and she had failed no one. Her trances had been crisp and short and accurate, almost staccato machine gun glimpses of consciousness, and she had dazzled her clients with the data she had dredged from the cards. "I feel like a pressed duck, a squeezed grape," she sighed when it was over. Now here was Nearly Normal awakening her. He brought a cucumber sandwich and a half pint of milk. Good. Food would revive her. The bread slices collapsed like movie set walls beneath her bite. The mayonnaise squished. The cucumber snapped tardy like the spine of an elf. She held aloft the milk carton and read aloud from it. 400 USP units, vitamin D added per quart from activated ergosterol. Amanda winced before drinking. Activated ergosterol? Jimmy? I'm not sure about this activated ergosterol. You suppose it could be a euphemism for strontium 90? Maybe it'll make me sterile. That might be something less than a tragedy, said Nearly Normal. He patted her discreetly ballooning belly. At any rate, the information on milk containers is highly educational. My first concepts of infinity were developed from looking at pet milk cans when I was a kid. On the label there was a picture of a cow in a can, her big mooey head hanging out of one end of the can, another pet milk can naturally, and on the label of that can was the same cow in another pet milk can. And that can also had a cow in can design on its label. And those cow cans, one inside the other, just went on, growing progressively smaller as far as the eye could see. It walloped my little mind. They've changed the label, Amanda pointed out. Yeah, they have, sighed Jimmy, as he left to return to the show. To Madison Avenue, even infinity is expendable. On Tuesday morning, there was an unseasonal frost. The grass looked as if it had been chewing Tums. Across the antacid residue, Nearly Normal's boots jitterbugged from camp to camp. Paychecks to dispense, goodbyes to exchange. From camp to camp he trotted through his own breath like a riot cop charging tear gas. His glasses steamed over, his nose was its own gas mask. Beautiful show last night, he hollered to every performer he saw. Beautiful. When he ducked into the Ziller tent, he found its occupant still abed, although Amanda and Thor were awake playing mommy-baby games in the puffy crispness of quilts. Nearly Normal hoped he could convince John Paul to reconsider his refusal to go to New York to record. With Ziller on drums, the success of the Giant Panda Gypsy Blues Band album would be assured. But that eye that crawled slowly from beneath the covers, it was not looking for fame and fortune. "Oh, go back to sleep," said Nearly Normal, and the lid fell shut like the trapdoor of a spider. "Here's your pay," said the manager. "It's a skinny check and I apologize. Unlike some people we know, I think making money can be as creative as anything else, and it really brings me down because the circus didn't do better financially." Amanda bounded from her pallet and took the check. She was naked as a light bulb, and Nearly Normal got his first good look at her tattoos. Pregnancy had given them an added dimension, as the dome of the Sistine Chapel had done to Michelangelo's cartoons. For a moment, Jimmy forgot his monetary woes. "A circus is not a department store," said Amanda, sliding, uphill all the way, into a silver satin robe. "Would you like some fresh huckleberries and yogurt?" "Thanks, I would." "Well, at least we didn't lose money, and what's more important, in our own dumb way, we injected some Tibetan extract in the American vein." "Dear Jimmy," Amanda smiled, "you're Nearly Normal. All that stands between you and Wall Street is Tibet." "All indeed. I can never forgive John Paul for having been there. Ziller has had his Africa and my Tibet. Next to making $1 million in show business, my greatest desire is to see Tibet. What a catastrophe. For 40 centuries, Tibet was the seat of world enlightenment, guardian of the universal secrets, and now when we really need it, are capable of using it, invaded, sealed off, despoiled. No line of communication open. If only we can send them singing telegrams, exchange recipes, subscribe to their newspapers, receive some sign that their wisdom has not been snuffed, receive some signal as to what the next play should be. Amanda ceased sprinkling huckleberries into the yogurt bowl and turned her friend over and over like an old coin in the connoisseur fingers of her sight. "So you want a sign, do you?" she asked at last. "Jimmy, my ringmaster, do you think it an accident, a mere coincidence, that LSD became available to the public, was thrust into the consciousness of the West at precisely the time of the invasion of Tibet?" Nearly Normal didn't say a word, but his eyes throbbed and widened behind the lens of his spectacles, and he ran out into the frosty damp and never came back for his breakfast. "What would you like to see first?" Amanda's father asked his budding 12-year-old upon their arrival in Paris. "I'd like to visit the brothels," answered Amanda, scarcely looking up from her onion soup. Amanda's papa refused to take his pubescent daughter into the Parisian flesh pots, but he did point them out to her from the window of a taxi, whereupon the child asked, "Father, if you were in a whorehouse and you couldn't finish, would it be permissible to ask for a Bowser bag to take the leftovers home?" The Japs are to blame. Off the Pacific shore of Washington State, the Japanese current, a mammoth river of tropical water, zooms close by the coast on a southerly turn. Its warmth is released in the form of billows of tepid vapor, which the prevailing winds drive inland. When a few miles in, the warm vapor bangs head-on into the Olympic mountain range. It is abruptly pushed upward and outward, cooling as it rises and condensing into rain. In the emerald area that lies between the Olympics, the coastal range, and the Cascade Range, some 90 miles to the east, temperatures are mild and even. But during the autumn and winter months, it is not unusual for precipitation to fall on 5 of every 7 days. And when it is not raining, still the gray is pervasive, the sun a little boiled potato in a stew of dirty dumplings, the fire and light and energy of the cosmos trapped somewhere far behind that impenetrable slug-belly sky. Puget Sound may be the most rained-on body of water on Earth. Cold, deep, steep-shored, home to salmon and lipstick orange starfish, the Sound lies between the Cascades and the Olympics. The Skagit Valley lies between the Cascades and the Sound, 60 miles north of Seattle, an equal distance south of Canada. The Skagit River, which formed the valley, begins up in British Columbia, leaps and splashes southwestward through the high Cascade Wilderness, absorbing glaciers and sipping alpine lakes, running 200 miles in total before all fish-green driftwood, cluttered and silty, it spreads its double mouth like suckers against the upper body of Puget Sound. Toward the Sound end of the valley, the fields are rich with river silt, the soil ranging from black velvet to blonde sandy loam. Although the sea receives little unfiltered sunlight, peas and strawberries grow lustily in Skagit fields, and more than half the world's supply of beet seed and cabbage seed is harvested there. Like Holland, which it in some ways resembles, it supports a thriving bulb industry. In spring, its lowland acres vibrate with tulips, iris, daffodils, no bashful hues. At any season, it is a dry duck's dream. The forks of the river are connected by a network of sloughs, bedded with ancient mud and lined with cattails, tules, eelgrass, and sedge. The fields, though diked, are often flooded. There are puddles by the hundreds, and the roadside ditches could be successfully navigated by midget submarines. It is a landscape in a minor key, a sketchy panorama where objects, both organic and inorganic, lack well-defined edges and tend to melt together in a silver-green blur. Great islands of craggy rock arch abruptly up out of the flats, and at sunrise and moonrise, these outcroppings are frequently tangled in mist. Eagles nest on the island crowns and blue herons flap through the vales from slough to slough. It is a poetic setting, one which suggests inner meanings and invisible connections. The effect is distinctly Chinese. A visitor experiences the feeling that he has been pulled into a snug dynasty painting, perhaps before the intense wisps of mineral pigment have dried upon the silk. From almost any vantage point, there are expanses of monochrome worthy of the brushes of Mi Fai or Kuo Hsi. The Skagit Valley, in fact, inspired a school of neo-Chinese painters. In the 40s, Mark Tobey, Morris Graves, and their gray-on-gray disciples turned their backs on Cubist composition and European color, and using the shapes and shades of his misty terrain as a springboard, began to paint the visions of the inner eye. A school of sodden, contemplative poets emerged here too. Even the original inhabitants were an introspective breed. Unlike the Plains Indians, who enjoyed mobility and open spaces and sunny skies, the Northwest coastal tribes were caught between the dark waters to the west, the heavily forested foothills and towering Cascade peaks to the east, forced by the lavish rains to spend weeks on end confined to their long houses. Consequently, they turned inward, evolving religious and mythological patterns that are startling in their complexity and intensity, developing an artistic idiom for the aesthetic weight and psychological depth was unequaled among all primitive races. Even today, after the intrusion of neon signs in supermarkets and aircraft industries and sports cars, a hushed but heavy force hangs in the Northwest air. It defies flamboyance, deflates extroversion, and muffles the most exultant cry. Yet one inhabitant of this nebulous and mystic land had the audacity to establish a Dixie barbecue. There is a colony of expatriated North Carolinians up in the timber country around Darrington. Perhaps Mom was one of them. Her enterprise had not succeeded, obviously, and a disappointed and homesick Mom may have packed her curing salts and hot sauces and trucked on back to the red clay country where a good barbecue is paid the respect it deserves. At any rate, that aspect of the history of the cafe meant little to Amanda and John Paul Ziller, for they were immune to the mystique of the Southern pork barbecue. Neither had ever tasted the genuine article. Plucky Purcell had, of course, and he once remarked that the only meat in the world sweeter, hotter, and pinker than Amanda's twat is Carolina barbecue. Prior to signing a lease for Mom's Little Dixie, Ziller had warned Amanda of the rigors of her new environment. He explained to his bride that there was seldom a thunderstorm in Skagit County, simply not enough heat. So no matter whether the influence storms had on her was good or untimely evil, she could expect to be free of it as long as she resided in the Northwest. He told her that there would be butterflies in summer, but not nearly in the numbers to which she was accustomed in California and Arizona. Amanda knew naturally that cacti could not endure these latitudes, and even their motorcycle would be impractical during the rainy season that lingered from October to May. However, John Paul confronted her, in these ferny forests, he pointed to the alder-thatched Cascade foothills, the mushrooms are rising like loaves. Like hearts, they are pulsing and swelling, fungi of many hues, some shaped like trumpets, and some like bells, and some like parasols, and others like pricks, with thick meat, white as turkey or yellow as eggs, all reeking of primeval protein. And some contain bitter juices that make men go crazy and talk to God. Very well, said Amanda. Mushrooms it will be. And it was. Can you help me, John Paul? If anyone is capable of solving this riddle, it is you. From the tub of scented bubbles in which she soaked, Amanda extended her hand, palm up. The inscription had faded somewhat in the 2 years since it had so impertinently appeared. Ziller was forced to squint in order to register its finer details. He stared at it for a curiously long time. Finally he said, "Off the coast of Africa there is a secret radio station, on a ship, a condemned freighter, blackened by fire. Listing to starboard, flying quarantine flags. It begins transmitting at midnight and until dawn plays the music of pre-colonial Africa, extremely rare pan-tribal recordings, if recordings they are. Perhaps the sounds are live. Interspersed with this ancient music is commentary of a sort. In a totally unknown language, I mean it isn't even related to any known human tongue, existing or extinct. Some of the words are short and grunty, but others are very stretched out and angular and sensual, like Modigliani nudes. Linguistic experts are completely stymied. They claim the language does not follow logical phonetic patterns. Yet thousands of blacks listen devoutly to the broadcasts, and while they will not say that they comprehend the commentary, they do not seem baffled by it either. Of the 5,000 varieties of mushrooms that grow in the United States, approximately 2,500 are found in western Washington. I find these odds charming, said Amanda, salivating and lacing her boots. Actually, there was little time for fungi those first few days at Mom's Little Dixie, although the Zillers did gather some meadow mushrooms on the golf course at Mount Vernon and filled another bucket in a pasture on the river road. The meadow mushroom, Agaricus campestris II, Madam Goody, begins life looking like a slightly imperfect ping-pong ball and matures into a skullish white pancake. Its gills are pink when young, gradually turning chocolate. Shamefully, it admits to being a first cousin to the Agaricus bisporus, the mushroom found in the produce sections of supermarkets, and the Agaricus hortensis, the kind one buys in tin cans. True fungus fanciers look upon those two traders with withering disdain, for only that pair among all the thousands have allowed themselves to be domesticated. The campestris has a more interesting flavor than the supermarket sellouts, is less dull in color and less conservative in shape. But it suffers as a result of the weaklings in its family. Its flavor could never inspire the odes or odd burps that the more noble varieties of wild mushrooms command. Still, when sautéed with minced onion in a sour cream sauce and served over rice, it is comfortably close to succulent, as the Zillers would readily attest. Anyway, the campestris would have to do for now. Amanda and John Paul hadn't the hours yet to devote to the deep woods hunt. They were too busy cleaning house. On the ground floor of Mom's Little Dixie, there was an enormous L-shaped dining room defined by an enormous L-shaped counter, a huge kitchen, 2 fundamental toilets, sexually segregated, and a fair-sized, windowless room that may have been used as a pantry. Upstairs, the stairs ascended from the rear of the kitchen, there was an apartment consisting of 5 spacious rooms and a bath. Out back, in the trees, remember that the cafe sat in a grove at the edge of croplands, there was a garage above which were 2 rooms that could be used for either storage or quarters. With pail and mops and brooms and rags, and an alchemicus of detergent, scouring powders and waxes, to which well-paid marketing expert had given names such as Row, Rid, Thrill, and Zap, carefully chosen for their simple violence, Amanda and John Paul set out to clear all those compartments of dirt, dust, and debris. Moncul was put to work washing windows, and although easily distracted and prone to slop, the baboon did get them clean. Even Baby Thor had duties, emptying dustpans and fetching materials. With painting and decorating to follow, the project was destined to take weeks. At first, Amanda was too occupied to pay much attention to John Paul's detachment. He's an introverted and private man, she thought, and he needs time alone in his head. But the bride, after all, was a female animal, and when Ziller's contemplative mood held over into his second day and third, she began to suspect the worst, wondering if he had turned remorseful about having married her. Eventually she approached him with her fears, which he dispelled somewhat by balling her on the spot, dust rags beneath her bottom, her head on a mop. Then he confessed that he had been worrying about Plucky Purcell. Not a word had been heard from the Mad Pluck since the memorable morning after near Sacramento. He doesn't strike me as an excessively reliable sort, consoled Amanda. He's probably followed by the charmer's pipes down some remote path of eroticism and simply forgotten all about us. She then admitted that while she was not immune to Purcell's roguish charms, she found him something of a hypocrite. He seems aggressively preoccupied with the wickedness of the American economy, yet he is employed as a logger, and if one is going to pollute one's consciousness with hate, fear, and blame, one might as well acknowledge that no single facet of the economic power structure, except for the oil ogre, has so brutally and insensitively pillaged America's natural resources as has the lumber industry, according to Amanda. So there. Thus, it became incumbent upon Ziller to offer in behalf of Al Westminster Plucky Purcell some biographical data. Part 1. A career as a public servant became necessary for the youngest Purcell son when other avenues of accomplishment were closed to him as a result of particular indiscretions. Not that he wasn't allowed a second chance. To wit, the United States Navy felt that Plucky had the makings of an officer and a gentleman despite the notoriety that surrounded his Mexican vacation. Despite his silly grin, he was accepted for pilot's training and was graduated from the Pensacola Air School, third in his class. Next came advanced training in jets, swifter, more complicated crafts, which he flew with his by now customary aplomb. But fate lay in wait for Plucky in the shape of raisin bread. What irritated Ensign Purcell most gruffly about the Navy was the hour which it deemed imperative for its junior pilots to quit their beds. We are, through the good taste of Congress, legally gentlemen, he argued, and there are hours, specifically those between midnight and noon, when no proper gentleman would permit himself to be disturbed. Still, Purcell did his duty, arising at 5:30 each morning despite having caroused through most of the soft Florida night, and attending to his toilet prior to visiting the officers' mess for breakfast. Now the mess officer, being of course in charge of the officers' mess, had decided for reasons known only in his secret and greasy heart to serve toasted raisin bread each morning. No other kind of bread or biscuit did he provide his guest. Just raisin bread, toasted. Ensign Purcell complained about this daily, pointing out that only a pervert or a geek would enjoy sweet gummy raisins mucking about in his mouthful of egg, though he said this none too loudly, for all around him the cream of American manhood was chomping away with gusto. Whatever had initially motivated the mess officer, and it could have been, in fairness and in his employ, sadistic tendencies soon revealed themselves. Mess officer gleefully ignored Purcell's protests and kept the raisin toast popping. Came the hour for satisfaction. From the ship's service, Purcell purchased a giant family-sized tube of Colgate toothpaste. By the light of his desk lamp, he slit the bottom of the tube with a razor blade and patiently extracted its contents. The next evening he spent meticulously refilling the tube with uncolored oleomargarine. He then resealed it and took it to breakfast. Mess officer sensed that something was amiss when Purcell cheerfully refused eggs and took a stack of toast instead, raisin bread toast. Plucky sat at a table in the center of the dining hall and unwrapped his big tube with the Colgate label. Nonchalantly, he began squeezing out coils of slick white stuff onto the toast, which, piece by piece, he devoured. Conversation in the mess was first paralyzed, Then a fierce buzzing commenced. All eyes were on the madman eating toothpaste. Some of Purcell's fellow trainees were amused. Most were aghast. The older officers boiled immediately into stiff-faced huff. Mess officer observed this and knew that he must act. Best officer says, "Ensign, just what in hell do you think you're doing?" Ensign Purcell, "Eating breakfast, sir. The toast is especially palatable this morning. Raisins plump and chewy." Licks a curlicue of margarine off a grinning lip, flashes a Colgate smile. Cleans the breath while it cleans the teeth. Mess officer confirmed with 3 lieutenants at a nearby table. "What can we do?" he asked mournfully. "He's doing this just to bug me. There's no regulation against eating toothpaste." "There's regulations against an officer acting like a goddamn billy goat," said one lieutenant. "Call the SPs and have him arrested. We'll think of something to charge him with." As it turns out, Plucky was charged with conduct on becoming an officer and was confined to quarters for 30 days. His sentence weighed on him lightly, too slightly for an incorrigible whoremonger, thought mess officer, and on the occasion when he was officer of the deck, he pulled a surprise 11 p.m. inspection of Purcell's room, fully expecting to find a bar girl or two stashed away in the ensign's bunk. He found no women, but he did find several ounces of Apache gold, a smokable delicacy for which Plucky had acquired a taste, while south of the border, mess officer's joy in his discovery was tempered, however, by the fact that before he can get to a phone to report it, he had half a loaf of stale raisin bread stuffed down his throat. Biographical data, Part 2. To a son of the nobility, 3 fields of endeavor are open, Plucky reminded himself. These are military, religion, and politics. The military has failed me. There is no public office to which I could realistically aspire. As for religion, that is a subject which holds a maximum fascination for me, but I fear the seminary gates would be bolted at the earliest signal of my approach. He sat down upon his duffel bag and with his dishonorable discharge lit a Havana cigar. It was nearly dark and he was giving up hope of hitching a ride. There is, however, one occupation where politics, the military, and religion overlap, which embodies prominent features of all 3. He blew a target of concentric smoke rings, then threw his stogie over a palm tree, lugged his suitcase, and began to trudge in the general direction of the Pacific Ocean. Despite or because of 6 months in the brig, he was in good condition and prepared, if necessary, to walk all the way. "But," he vowed, "I'm blindfolding myself for 800 of those 3,000 miles so as to shut out the Middle West." And on that note of acute discernment, and with no small sense of fatalism, Plucky Purcell embarked upon a life of crime. Biographical data, Part 3. Whether man is a criminal or a public servant is purely a matter of perspective. Man's peculiarity, ambivalent psyche permits him to operate simultaneously according to 2 opposing codes. There is the code which he professes to live by, and there is the code to whose standards he actually does adhere. The deceit is so ingrained and subtle that most men truly are unaware of it, although to psychologists, philosophers, and the like, it is no news at all. Man is not as good as he thinks he is, nor as bad for that matter, but let's not complicate things. He has certain needs, demands certain services, which in reality are probably healthy and natural, but to which in time's passage and as a result of odd quirks in his ethos, he has ascribed, or allowed his religious leaders, often guilt-warped, psychopathic misfits, to ascribe, negative values. In the queerest of paradoxical metamorphosis, honest desires change into taboos. To simply say that a desire is immoral, or resorting to even flimsier abstraction, To deem fulfillment of a desire illegal does not eliminate the desire. It does not eliminate anything except straightforwardness. It creates, in addition to a climate of deception, an underworld into which men descend in order to partake of Code B services not permitted under provision of Code A. Society hires armed goons to force itself to conform to Code A, but a greater sum of money is spent each year in surreptitious enjoyment of the services provided by Code B. The underworld persists because society needs it, insists upon it, supports it, at the same time that it denies and persecutes it, of course. But enough of that. Let's simply say that according to Code A, Plucky Purcell, drug dealer and abortionist's agent, is a criminal. Under the reality of Code B, however, he is dutifully serving the interests of his fellow man. Biographical data, Part 4. Although there is probably no such thing as a typical citizen of the underworld, Purcell would not conform to any man's conception of the ordinary criminal. For one thing, he doesn't look like a dealer. The genetic system responsible for his physique must have plagiarized openly from the Belvedere Apollo. His face, too, is beautiful, although its classical composition is inclined to crumble when he indulges his goofy grin. Man, Purcell has a grin like the beer barrel polka, a ding-dong daddy grin, a Brooklyn Dodger grin, a grin you can wear to a Polish wedding. His smile walks in woolly socks and suspenders and asks to borrow the funny papers. You could trap rabbits with it. Teeth line up inside the cartridges in a Mexican bandit's gun belt. It is the skunk in his rose bush, the crack in his cathedral. Purcell's methods are as atypical as his looks. He caters, for example, to an exclusive clientele. His services are available only to artists. Now, if Plucky has ever in his life suffered a creative impulse, he either successfully suppressed it or satisfied it under cover of darkness. There are no indications that he is a frustrated artist, yet for reasons which his friends have never adequately explored, he attached himself to a wide circle of painters, sculptors, filmmakers, and poets. In fact, among artists on both coasts of America, there is hardly a more familiar face. Our most rigorous and challenging geniuses have tasted his dope. Their girlfriends, models, and wives have availed themselves of his medical connections. Moreover, he has been a bodyguard to artists in peril, a babysitter for those who did not take advantage of his clinical references, and a cherished dinner guest of the great and obscure. Although it did not make the papers, a Pulitzer Prize winner once showed up to go his bail. Did Purcell, convinced of artists' traditional mythical appetites for sin, and aware too of their insulation and intelligence, merely see in the creative minority as a safe and steady market for his wares? Or did he recognize that despite the attention paid, art today, though actually it is culture and not art that draws the light, despite the historically proven importance of the artist to society, artists are still second-class citizens who might need to be served and protected by an agent sensitive to their socioeconomic deprivations and emotional demands? Or is the Mad Pluck genuinely, personally moved by artisthood, its ideas, and its works? Well, whatever. Perhaps the most astonishing characteristic of Plucky's criminal career is the ethics with which he practices it. His fees are more than fair. He seeks to make a living, not a killing. The times are not rare when a girl in trouble without adequate funds has had her surgery bill paid out of Plucky's own pocket. Lest he sound the altruist he is not. However, it should be disclosed that he usually required the girl to share a weekend with him, inspecting ceilings in some modest hotel. While he is untainted by monetary greed, it cannot be denied that he is a pig for pussy. There is more to say in Purcell's behalf. He does not escort women to abattoirs. He represents trained physicians who are skilled and compassionate and who wash their hands before and after. As for drugs, he carries a line of the most reliable marijuana and hashish. To a client whom he feels is sound enough to handle it, he also will sell LSD, mescaline, STP, DMT, or psilocybin. He does not deal in hand with narcotics or amphetamines. He does not tolerate those who do. When he meets pushers of smack and speed, as he does not infrequently in his profession, he attempts to convince them that it is a vile and murderous act to peddle chemicals which can ultimately only destroy their imbibers. If his pleas fail, he batters heads and breaks bones. That makes him unpopular with racketeers and police alike. Try as they might, neither the mafia nor the police nor any combination thereof can win the respect of Plucky Purcell. It is possible that Plucky is narrow-minded where mobsters and cops are concerned. Possibly he does not try to understand the reasons for their boorish manners, their mutual greed, their artless authority. Something in his nature has always been intolerant of authority, especially when it is violently imposed upon those who seem neither to need it nor want it, as is usually the case. Rash boy, his conscience does not even twitch when his small fry way he upsets the delicate symbiotic relationship between organized crime and organized crime prevention. He's insensitive to the losses his prejudices have inflicted upon the international heroin cartel and the embarrassment his interference has caused the police. And as if to add insult to injury, he is always taking part in social protests, marching in demonstrations, and otherwise exercising his moral and constitutional rights in a manner that cannot be helpful to the establishment, not the legal establishment nor the illegal one. Thus, with official dub, he is less popular than a tough cut of beef. In fact, Purcell, long before Amanda and John Paul's marriage, had become so hot that he was obliged to spend 4 to 6 months each year outside of his chosen profession. During the cooling off periods, he would ship out as a merchant seaman, labor as a cowboy in Texas or Wyoming, enlist as a smoke jumper in Montana, fly crop dusting duty in California — he has maintained his enthusiasm for flying and is a licensed pilot — or cut timber in the great Northwest. While he shares Amanda's disdain for tree exploiters, it is in the big woods that he feels safest. Logging keeps him in top physical shape, and the pure forest air sweetens his brain and his lungs. If they really decide to do you in, all the trees in Washington and Oregon can't hide you, a leading painter had warned. Oh man, I'm only a nuisance, Plucky answered. They won't get their Italian loafers muddy to slap a mosquito. And cranking out his 5-pound grin, he grabbed his caulk boots and headed for tall timber. Bravado aside, however, Purcell would have to admit that Ziller's concern for him was not irrational. Amanda, after she had absorbed his background, joined her husband in his unease. Of course, as the reader might have surmised, neither syndicate exterminator nor super narcotic sleuth reached Purcell in his hard labor up-country hideaway. It was an event a bit more startling than a rub-out or arrest that curtailed Plucky's customary epistles to his pals. So startling, in fact, that had Ziller an inkling of it, he might have been too amazed to have bawled his bride on that gray Skagit afternoon, let alone to have proposed the Babylonian slobber magic which they practiced after supper. No, the author exaggerates. It wasn't as startling as that. Amanda went once to a blues club. Her date was Madam Lincoln Rose Goody, who was, as Amanda somewhat innocently discovered, not academic in bed. All evening, music or no, an old Negro called the Jelly Man passed among the patrons selling from a tray fresh raspberries, sugar, glass jars, and little brown spiders. "Jelly Man," said Amanda, I can understand the berries and the sugar and the jars. But how did the spiders get in? Under the door, answered the benevolent jellyman. They had 2 garter snakes and tsetse fly, and the tsetse fly was not even alive, hardly a roadside attraction. They had a baboon, true enough, but under no circumstances would Ziller assign Mon Cull a role in the menagerie. As long as my friend's body turns on a pivot of crimson buttocks, as long as his eloquent fangs pierce honeydews and melons, as long as he in wisdom and laughter goes on spinning around the sun, he will not be gawked at, gibbered over, and goaded by beings less dignified than he. Ziller's attitude was understood perfectly by Amanda, for she had brought her dancing bear to perform with the Indo-Tibetan circus, only to have it choked to death on a handkerchief that had some Reuben sport tossed into the pen. But, she answered, granting that Mon Cull is a remarkable creature, that he is the elder statesman among monkeys, that his marcescent eyelids have opened upon sights and splendor about which the most romantic among us only dream, granting that do not all wild animals have dignity? Can we justify caging any beast, subjecting it to the public gape? After some hesitation, John Paul agreed that they could not. He hesitated because he was, after all, a man of the jungle, a man dressed in hides and feathers, a man who had hunted and been hunted in lands where primitive equalities prevail. It was not in Africa or in India, however, but at the Bronx Zoo that he had been warned of the folly of anthropomorphism. That wolf that paces incessantly in its cage, that panther that sways as if to music behind the metal barricades. We tend to think them unhappy, angry, claustrophobic, in despair because of their confinement. But we're just imposing our own human emotions on animals who are not biologically capable of such feelings. That's what the keeper had said. The soft, brown eye glow of the deer looks sad to us, but that's just the way the deer's eyes are built. There are no sad deer in or out of corrals. Anthropomorphism is a silly deceit. He'd said that too. Furthermore, he'd claimed that animals are better off in zoos than in their natural habitats. In the wilds, the battle for survival is unrelenting. Hunger follows the animal like a shadow. Thousands of beasts starve each year the world over. What's more, there are predators to escape, and diseases. In the zoo, an animal is safe, well-fed, housed in comfortable temperatures, given medical attention. Why, zoos are almost utopias for the beasts. It was a good argument, yet John Paul offered it to Amanda with a minimum of conviction, and when he rejected it, he concurred. As unrefined and basic as an animal's emotional equipment may be, it is not insensitive to freedom. Somewhere in the archives of the crudest instinct is recorded the truth that it is better to be endangered and free than captive and comfortable. In the cage, even in the, quote, environmental parks, end quote, which the better zoos are providing for their charges, a creature is out of harmony with the natural rhythms of organ and earth. It must eat foods out of their regular season. Soft living erodes its cunning. It becomes confused about mating and often fails to reproduce. An immense frustration overtakes it due to its inability to heed instinctual instructions. Were it capable of choice, surely it would prefer to take its chances, quote, out there, end quote, against the odds of hunger and hungry. While suffering is no more glamorous, or even necessary, for animal than man, and while for the being who is at peace with itself, survival may be of trivial concern, there is still something kind of noble in the struggle for survival. Whether meaningful or meaningless, the game of life is there to be played, and the animal, in his animal way, seems to know it. And the cage is an offense to what his inner animal voice tells him is right and true. Lubricated by dialogue, Amanda pushed further. When a man confines an animal in a cage, he assumes the ownership of that animal. But an animal is an individual. It cannot be owned. When a man tries to own an individual, whether that individual be another man, an animal, or even a tree, he suffers the psychic consequences of an unnatural act. Have you ever watched visitors at a menagerie or zoo? The fools they make of themselves. The way they leer and snigger and vex and demand entertainment and taunt. A caged beast, like an excess of alcohol, reduces man to his most banal dimensions. And he is only slightly better behaved when observing human inmates of prisons and institutions. A creature, human or otherwise, that has had its freedom compromised has been degraded. In a subconscious reaction that combines guilt, fear, and contempt, the keepers of the caged, even the observers of the caged, are degraded themselves. The cage is a double degrader. Any bar, whether concrete or intangible, that stands between a living thing and its liberty is a communicable perversity, dangerous to the sanity of everyone concerned. What had gotten into Amanda? She was never moved to pedantry unless she cocked one ear to listen for the telltale thunderclap. But all she heard was Moncol shuffling into the room and up to Ziller's side, where he bowed and scraped and grinned apologetically like some cranky old black porch digger. Ziller squatted and met the baboon eye to eye, but when Moncol backed away, with an Uncle Tom one-step, opals of spittle popping in the corners of his obsequious smile. "You Judas creep," scolded Ziller. "You who've lived a life of hedonistic abandon, you would insinuate that I've held you captive? Is there a master in our relationship? It is you who has owned me." The baboon barked uproariously and turned 4 somersaults. And although Ziller laughed and said, "You'd better watch your manners or you'll end up in Detroit, and you know what happens to baboons there," he was mired to his cerebral axle in troubled thoughts. And over in a corner, on a sunflowered pillow, Amanda too was subdued as she remembered the thousands of butterflies she had enveloped in her net. At least, she thought, I never once introduced one to chloroform. Her rationalization only shaded the hues of her shame. It was a hell of a way to start a roadside zoo. In the absence, perhaps alas permanent, of John Paul Ziller, this writer was about an hour ago allowed to look through the missing magician's possessions. After all, the FBI and CIA have rummaged Ziller's and Purcell's belongings so thoroughly, there could be little left of intimacy or value. Your correspondent found what he was seeking, however, an English language dictionary. It should be quite useful in the completion of this document, and he should have thought of it sooner. Perhaps from here on out, the reader will note some improvement in vocabulary, if not overall, what do you call it? Already the author has learned that dock is just another word for Dak, and dot is Scottish for doubt. What do you make of that? "Magnificent!" exclaimed John Paul Ziller, pronouncing the word like he was a Kansas City intellectual describing the Louvre to his sister-in-law who called to tell him to bring his vacation slides over some other night because she'd burned the spaghetti sauce and the baby had colic. "Truly wondrous! Appraising it now, I feel a bit like Bernard Berenson standing before Michelangelo's Temptation, quaffing rare draughts of unadulterated energy and itching to get his cultivated meat hooks on the heroic buttocks of Eve. Though in truth, due to its humility and patience, it's less a Michelangelo than a Renoir. The roundness, the warmth, the rosy delight, the joie de vivre, the casual eroticism, the full and robust charm. It is at once a dramatically overflowing embodiment of the life force and an honest monument to the occasional genius of the plebeian palate." With that blast of language, Ziller stepped back against fir trunk to gain a slightly more distant perspective on the 30-foot hot dog. Amanda was shocked. She had never seen him like this, smiley, ebullient. Not once in the weeks she'd known him, worked and played with him, listened to his drums and flutes and plans, pored over his maps and charts, mingled her beauty and force with his, trapped explosive ribbons of his semen in her various bodily orifices. Not once had he replaced his high, jungle pride with such easy enthusiasm. It did not displease her, however. She walked to his side and stood with him, the better to admire the object of his excitement, the mighty mammoth king of weenies which he had painted in oils on 34 feet of plywood paneling. Note how the wrinkles in the bun, its steamed soft bun of course, fold dynamically, intuiting hitting movement as if they were folds in silk draped about a Renaissance Madonna. The texture of the bun is soft, but not rubbery. It has the luster of a prairie moon. The sausage itself possesses a kind of peasant folk serenity. It lounges in that bun as plump with confidence as a Polack bowling champion snoozing in a backyard hammock on the afternoon before the Great Lakes Regional Finals. A simple fellow, the sausage, but the way his gentle contours catch the light and hold it gleaming, one senses something glorious in his spirit. I have molded his bulk. Can you sense the physical participation of the artist in the formal objectification of the weenie's presence? In a continuous volume that consumes vast quantities of space. It is three-dimensional, tactile, larger than life, as rotund in good nature as Falstaff, but not entirely devoid of Hamlet's rank. And what glamour is lent to the scene by the golden cloak of mustard, by the jazzy, jumpy play of flat patterns in the relish. Ahem. Amanda licked her lips in amazement, more at the verbiage than at the inspiration of it, although it was indeed a hot dog of grand proportions. The panel was 34 feet long and 9 feet high. The red hot was 30 feet in length and a little less than 6 feet in height, and that weenie was not just loitering there in empty space. She perceived at the left end of the bun a green valley with cornfields and a river, and some men in a boat on the river drinking beer and trolling for catfish. And across the river was a stadium with a baseball game in progress. Probably a World Series because of all the dignitaries in the stands. Political figures, movie stars, and their counterparts in crime. In the 24-inch space at the right end of the hot dog, there was a bright yellow plain with just a few thorny trees a-thirsting on it, and a pride of lions resting in the stingy shade beneath one of those trees, and far in the distance, too far for the warm lions to bother with, a herd of wildebeest was kicking up dust, and even further in the distance, Mount Kilimanjaro jumped up like God's own sugar tit, and in a modest encampment at the foot of the peak, E. Hemingway was cleaning his Weatherby .375 Magnum, not trusting the native boys to handle such an instrument, and slurping his gin. In some mystic gesture of interracial world solidarity, the Frankfurter bridged Africa and America in a manner that no United Nations mission or foreign aid program could hope to equal. It quickened the pulse and reminded Amanda of John Paul's testimonial of a few days prior in which he professed that the sausage was one of the few achievements of Western technology that he could genuinely respect. Up above that ambassador hot dog in the night blue sky above it was to Amanda's eyes the most thrilling segment of the whole tableau, a sky full of vanilla stars and a pastel planets and rushing comets and constellations. Jupiter was in the house of Gemini, and novae and nebulae and meteors dissolving in spittoons of fire and tropical moon laid out against a cloud banked like a radioactive oyster on the half-shell, and dominating the entire side rail panorama was Saturn, silver and mysterious mushy omelet of ammonia and ice, girded by its sharp gas rings like an avatar egg, with a hip-hugger aura. And all this astronomical grandeur merely a backdrop for the mustard-draped shoulders of the cosmic colossal weenie, a sight to put a lump in the throat of the most unambitious Nebraska piglets, bar none. The hot dog was to be erected on the roof of the roadhouse. Some workmen were coming from Mount Vernon with a crane. In a day or two, as soon as the paint was dry, it would be invisible for miles. The Zillers had reached no decision on the contents of the zoo. They were opposed to cages. Society was opposed to wild animals running loose in restaurants. The proper compromise evaded them. Amanda consulted the I Ching. She induced a trance. With no fit results, they had agreed to forget it for a while. In the meantime, they could concentrate on what items they would sell in their shop, on what foods they would serve. Something simple. They both insisted on simplicity. They had no intention of wasting their days cooking and washing dishes for tourist hordes. They shuddered at the thought. Hot dogs, John Paul had suggested. Good old-fashioned hot dogs with steamed, softened buns. We'll keep our buns in a steam cabinet the way they did when men were men and the sausage was the backbone of an empire. We'll offer fresh onions, raw or fried, a variety of mustards and ketchups and relishes. Bacon, chopped nuts, melted cheese, sauerkraut, optional at additional cost, like white walls or power steering. The sausages we will carefully select for size and flavor. 100% meat sausages, little heavier on the beef than the pork, the best we can buy. The finest offspring of German technical expertise and American ingenuity. Amanda was not at ease with the prospect of operating a hot dog stand. She was a vegetarian. Due to the fact that she occasionally consumed milk and milk derivatives, she could not be considered a strict vegetarian. Amanda, purists would scold, milk is an animal product. How can you drink milk and still consider yourself a vegetarian? And Amanda would answer, the label states that this carton contains an activated ergosterol. Have you ever heard of a cow that activated ergosterol? But as vegetarians are a stubborn lot, the argument was never resolved. At any rate, Amanda protested. I shan't impose my beliefs on other people, she said, but my conscience would turn purple were I, a vegetarian, to earn an income selling meat. There are limits to the decency of irony. Why, I'd feel like a Mormon. Not that Amanda had any particular prejudice against Mormons, but she was a curious young woman, as many persons had established, and it confounded her curiosity that a denomination of non-smoking teetotalers like the Mormons could justify supporting itself through the operation of supermarkets and drugstores in which alcoholic beverages and tobacco are prominent wares. John Paul was untroubled by any undue reverence for meat. Look, he said, the world is overrun with animals, great and small, fanged and feathered, all eating one another in happy harmony. Man is the party pooper. He'll eat pig flesh and pretend it's pork. He'll devour a chicken but not a kitten. A turkey but not a Turk. It isn't that he is principled particularly. In fact, we all gut somebody every day, but it's sneaky, symbolic, unappetizing, ego-supportive duty to God and country. Never with a good pot roast in mind. No cheerful, honest cannibalism. Alas, alas. Amanda was not much swayed by John Paul's remarks. Incidentally, though, her vegetarian sentiments received a bit of a shake a few months later when Marx Marvelous said to her, the cow became a sacred symbol to the Hindu because it gave milk and chops and hides. It nourished the babies and kept the old folks warm. Because it provided so many good life-supporting things, it was regarded as an embodiment of the universal mother, hence holy. Then it occurred to some monk or other, some abstract scholarly kook, as you would say, that, gee, folks, since the cow is holy, we maybe shouldn't be eating it and robbing its udder. So now the Hindu has got sacred cows up to here, but no more milk and steaks. They starve in plain view of holy herds, so big only Hopalong Cassidy could stop them if they took a notion to stampede. The spiritual man's beef against beef is the result of a classic distortion. It's another case of lost origins and inverted values. But that was Marx Marvelous, and that came later. For the present, they worked it out. They had to. While the interior of the cafe was now clean and freshly painted, the exterior had hardly been touched. A warning, the sky bulged like the sooty cheeks of an urban snowman. It hadn't rained yet, but it wouldn't be long. The downpour was overdue. Action was required, so Amanda reluctantly gave her consent to frankfurters, and in concession, John Paul agreed to a ban on dangerous fluids such as coffee and soda pop. For beverages, they would serve the juices of fruits and vegetables. Amanda would squeeze them fresh in her automatic juicer. She had fun planning zesty combinations, apple papaya juice, for example. Carrot, orange, spinach, tomato, cucumber. Good health to all. People will think this is a real funny place, said Ziller, when they can't buy their coffee and Coca-Cola. It was a funny place anyway. A roadside zoo with no animals, except 2 garter snakes and a tsetse fly. And the tsetse fly was not even alive. A trailer of rain fell for an hour at sunrise, but the afternoon was dry. The hot dog was erected on the roof of the cafe. It looked good. It could be seen for miles. Ziller's magnificent sausage became a landmark in the Skagit County. Directions were given in relation to it. Quote, turn right a couple 100 yards past the Big Weenie, unquote, some helpful farmer might say. From that time on, Mount Vernon school children would be obliged to compose annual essays on, quote, the sausage, its origin, its meaning, and its cure, unquote. To this day it hovers in plump passivity above the fertile fields. It is a perfect emblem for the people and the land. A sausage is an image of rest, peace, and tranquility in stark contrast to the destruction and chaos of everyday life. Consider the peaceful repose of the sausage compared with the aggressiveness and violence of bacon. This quite an interesting place you're fixing up here. The speaker was Gunnar Hansen, a 35-ish pea farmer from down the road away. Thank you, Mr. Hansen, smiled Amanda. Gunnar Hansen, yes. The mystic old Chinese valley, with Dutch undertones, in northwestern America is inhabited almost exclusively by Scandinavians. But, you folks, your name ain't Kendrick, Farmer Hansen said with uncertainty. No, Amanda assured him, our name is Ziller. Well, who's this Kendrick? Asked Farmer Hansen, trying to sound jocular through an accent the color of a midwinter suicide. He was nodding his tombstone head at the new neon-bordered sign that stretched across the roadhouse facade just below the great giant sausage. Captain Hendrick Memorial Hot Dog Wildlife Preserve. That's how the sign read in letters the height of the Jewish ghetto tailors. Shame on you, Mr. Hansen, Amanda said. You don't know your local history. Well, I thought I did. Captain John Kendrick, you can look him up in History of the Pacific Northwest by George W. Fuller. Captain Hendrick was one of the first fur traders and explorers to operate in the Puget Sound region. Came here in 1788. On slim evidence, he was reported to be the first white man to navigate the Strait of Juan de Fuca and to circumnavigate Vancouver Island. He did quite a bit of exploring, but unfortunately, he neglected to leave any records of his discoveries. History has repaid him for that oversight by generally ignoring him. After about 5 years here, he tired of the Northwest skin trade and set sail for the Sandwich Islands. He arrived on December 12, 1794, and was immediately killed by a shot from a British ship which was saluting him. Oh, awful, said Farmer Hansen with a Nordic insensitivity to irony. He drove away in his truck. Farmer Hansen had 5 children attending public schools in Mount Vernon and Conway. Perhaps that explains why it is now common belief among Skagit County pupils that Captain John Kendrick invented the weenie sandwich in 1794. Amanda climbed to the top of the spruce tree, the better to absorb the Skagit twilight. She climbed slowly, using only one hand, for which the other arm she cradled her belly, much as an avid bowler holds his favorite ball. The sky was afloat with raw oysters and dead nuns, a grim canopy beneath which flew wild ducks by the dozens. It was a green sunset. The reds, the oranges, the purples which Amanda automatically associated with sunsets had been snuffed out in the soggy cloud pine, and the nearly invisible sun that sank, beyond the fields, sloughs, rock islands, and tide flats, into Puget Sound, it looked like an unripe olive photographed through gauze. From her perch, Amanda could watch baby Thor as he played on the moss near the base of the tree, and she could watch John Paul as he nailed silhouettes of sausages to the newly painted facade of the cafe. The sausages, about 2 feet in length, had been cut from plywood and covered with diffraction grating, a thin synthetic metallic silver material that picks up light and diffracts it so that its shiny surface is constantly rainbowed with moving spectra. It is amazing, thought Amanda, how John Paul's weenie cutouts succinctly advertise our good common indigenous merchandise, while at the same time suggesting the virility fetishes of numerous African tribes. I'm glad that John Paul recognizes that they are images of pleasure, not of domination. Amanda rested quietly in the bows. Although the mid-October skies were gray, the air remained mild and mellow, and she was comfortable in a cactus-colored corduroy jumpsuit, beneath which there was not a threat of hampering underwear. She had devoted the day to arranging furnishings in the upstairs apartment, caring for Thor and baking panfuls of her notorious breads. Now she was due a rest. As she rested, she thought of many things. She thought of life and said to herself, "It's okay, I want more of it." She thought of death and said to herself, "If I fall out of this freaking treetop, I'll soon learn its secrets." She thought of the planar fields, some plowed dark brown, others yellow-green with cabbage or broccoli left deliberately to seed, that straightened toward the horizon in every direction, the ones to the east tilting into hills, the ones to the west falling off into the sound with a slow, fuzzy expansiveness. And she said to herself, "Although the earth's surface of our planet is 2/3 water, we call it the earth. We say we are earthlings, not waterlings. Our blood is closer to seawater than our bones to soil. But that's no matter. The sea is the cradle we all rocked out of. But it's to dust that we go. From the time that water invented us, we began to seek out dirt. The further we separate ourselves from the dirt, the further we separate ourselves from ourselves. Alienation is a disease of the unsoiled." She thought of the things that lovely young women usually think about when they are relaxing in treetops and unhampered by underwear, and she thought, as she often did at dusk, of the infinite goof. Mostly, however, she thought about the dilemma of the roadside zoo. A zoo without animals was no zoo at all. It was peaceful in the spruce. The breeze about her was buttery, tropical in texture, if not in temperature. A Canadian goose flapped over so close she could have reached up and grasped its honk. Over the sloughs she'd fly, hanging on to the dark arch of the primordial noise as a subway passenger holds onto a strap. The moments passed. It was very nearly night when she suddenly began to descend the tree, climbing faster than she had moved up it, letting her silken belly ball bounce where it might. "John Paul," she cried, "John Paul." The sausage hammering ceased. Ziller answered, "Umbatu Gigi," or was it Umbedo Gigi, or Umbudu Geki? It was a Swahili phrase, probably, or Neo-Hamitic, or from a Bantu dialect, and Amanda couldn't pronounce it, couldn't spell it, and couldn't define it. But her husband always answered with it when she called, so it made sense. "Insects," yelled Amanda, squirreling down the spruce trunk. "Insects in the tree?" "No, in the zoo." By this time she had reached the lowest limb, and John Paul helped her down onto his shoulders. Her crotch pressed against the back of his neck. She hadn't bathed yet that day, although they made love the night before. She smelled like the leftovers from an Eskimo picnic. He was inflamed. Didn't someone once say that odor is 80% of love? "Insects in the zoo," Amanda repeated. John Paul took baby Thor's hand, and he walked mother and son toward the back door. "What do you mean?" he asked, interest as faint in his voice as scruples in a letter from a collection agency. She felt his long Egyptian neck arching back against her, forcing the lips of her vagina apart, and she was determined to resist until she could present her new idea. They were in the kitchen now. John Paul was lifting Thor into his high chair, on the tray of which awaited a fat banana. Amanda was still riding John Paul's shoulders. An insect zoo, said Amanda. Insects, the most numerous creature on earth and perhaps the least understood. They don't require the space for their freedom that animals do. Most of them would be content to range over quite small areas. We could build wondrous cages for them, little palaces and pagodas, labyrinths and landing strips. Jewel-like enclosures. The pressure against her vulva was unrelenting. Am I to ascertain that you are proposing a hexapodium, a roadside attraction of beetles and bugs? Ziller was walking upstairs. Amanda had to duck to protect her head. Bony Watusi fingers kneaded her thighs. Why not? The cricket, the tarantula, the praying mantis all thrive in captivity and make interesting pets. Many insects live relatively long lives, and the upkeep is no problem. Bedbugs have been known. Whoops. John had dumped her onto the mattress. Have been known to live for a year on a single meal. Oh, my God. I could live for many years on these, said Ziller, nibbling madly. Amanda's jumpsuit was unzipped, throat to crotch. Between the parted corduroy, her pink belly rose, like the mushroom that conquered Hollywood. Insects are fascinating. Many of their senses are more highly developed than our own. Our tongues, for example, can't tell the difference between sugar solutions and dissolved saccharin. But bees, wasps, and butterflies, while they love sugar water, won't sip a saccharin substitute at all. Meanwhile, Ziller was doing a bit of tasting himself. Amanda was melting from the glory of it. She felt like the frosting left on the spoon that iced the cake of the world. Insects have hearts and blood circulation systems just as we do. But you know that it's impossible to take a beetle's pulse? Why had she said that? It was irrelevant. She was losing her rationale. John Paul was out of his loincloth. He hovered over her. His rigid member rested against her belly like a hoe handle against a pumpkin. Looking at it, all she could think to say was, the European cabbage butterfly has the most remarkable coiled proboscis. Gasp. Amanda was a stubborn woman. She was determined to have her say. With the mental equivalent of a Dutch boy finger, she tried to plug the hole of the glandular dike from whence her hot juices gushed. Well, look, don't you think it's a sound idea? We could have an ant farm and a flea circus. Some insect species are so beautiful. The giant rhinoceros beetle, the harlequin bug. All of them needn't be living. We could exhibit our scarab collection, and my rare mountain moths from South America, and of course our tsetse fly, which isn't even alive. At that moment, Ziller had entered her, 1/12 of a fathom deep. The dike broke, drowning the Dutch boy and countless wondrous insects of the world. Amanda shook John Paul awake in the middle of the night. No, he thought, it couldn't be. The baby isn't expected for 3 more months. His bride was propped on one elbow. He could tell she had just come out of a trance. Her face was drawn, her eyes were as lifeless as blotters. A silver candle was burning in her sanctuary, behind the perfumed curtains. Damn, she'd been out of bed. Civilization is dulling my senses, Ziller mused. In the jungle, nothing could have stirred within a 50-yard radius without awakening me. John Paul, Amanda asked in a soft, tired voice, are you aware of the animals that are going extinct? Well, yes, I suppose I am. I don't mean the big beasts of Africa that you miss so much. I'm referring to wildlife right here in this country. Threatened with extinction are the timber wolf, red wolf, Delmarva, peninsula fox squirrel, grizzly bear, San Joaquin kid fox, Florida panther, Caribbean monk seal, Guadalupe fur seal, key deer, Colombian white-tailed deer, Sonoran pronghorn, Indiana bat, black-footed ferret, and Florida sea crow, manatee. John Paul jerked with guilt at the mention of the Indiana bat. He suddenly recalled that when Amanda awakened him, he had been dreaming of his former wife. They were carrying her out of the Kansas City Opera House in the middle of Act 2 of Die Fledermaus. Her back cries were obscuring the mezzo-soprano drool drip from her gentle mouth like pearls from the anus of an angel. Ziller shuddered and drew the covers around his shoulders. And those are just the mammals, Amanda continued. There are birds. Hawaiian goose, Nene. Aleutian goose, Tulle white-fronted goose. Laysan duck, Hawaiian dark-rumped petrel. California condor. Florida Everglade kite. Hawaiian hawk, 2. Bald eagle. Attawaters greater prairie chicken. Masked bobwhite. Whooping crane. Yuma clapperrail. Eskimo curlew. Puerto Rican parrot. Ivory-billed woodpecker. Dusky seaside sparrow, crested honeycreeper. Akehokihoi, etc., etc. That's an irony that Plucky Purcell would adore, added Amanda, sounding a bit prouder. American economic growth, the cutting of forests, industrial pollution of air and streams, the spread of suburbia, is driving the bald eagle into extinction, and the bald eagle is the very whole and exact traditional symbol of the American Republic. You'd think that a people as hung up on abstractions as ours are would be rather uneasy about the prospects of murdering off its own symbol. If such conversation was an awkward intruder in the 3 a.m. of his consciousness, John Paul did not let on. Rather, he said, I read in a natural history book once that eagles are cursed with chronic bad behavior. Don't smile, it's a fact. One knows if one reads magazine ads or watches television how Americans feel about odors of the head and body. Could that explain their lack of concern over the eagle's demise? Life was draining back into Amanda's eyes as if her pupils had, too, been threatened with extinction only to receive an evolutionary reprieve. Imagine a cleanliness-obsessed Puritan society selecting a national symbol with habitual halitosis. But seriously, John Paul, listen to me. There are reptiles and amphibians going also. The alligator, blunt-nosed leopard lizard, San Francisco garter snake, Santa Cruz long-toed salamander, Texas blind salamander, and the black toad. And fishes? Yes, magi, fishes, short-nosed sturgeon, long-jaw cisco, greenback cutthroat trout, Montana West Slope cutthroat trout, Gila trout, Arizona or Apache trout, desert dace, blue pike, humpback chub, Colorado River squawfish, Devil's Hole pupfish, Owens River pupfish, Gila top minnow, Maryland darter, Clear Creek gambusia. You don't want me to list them all? That wouldn't be necessary. Well, I thought I'd keep you informed. Thank you. You believe there is something to consider here? For our zoo, I mean? Possibly we didn't try to save them all. Couldn't be done. We might concentrate on one species like the San Francisco garter snake. The pair we have now, I think they are more the Los Angeles garter snake. But Smokestack Lightning could get us a couple of the San Francisco variety. He's got connections in the snake world. Perhaps they'd mate. John Paul reached for his bedside drum and made a matrix of sound roll from it with the edge of his right hand and the palm of his left. Rhythm, creation, evolution, extinction. He hit the drum again. Rhythm, birth, growth, death, rhythm, creation, evolution, extinction. Extinction is part of the natural rhythm of the universe. Why screw around with God's rhythm section? We already have. The creatures that have gone extinct in the past were gradual victims of natural processes, such as changes in climatology to which they failed to adapt. But man has interfered in the organic, if haphazard, order of things. Through his own greed and indifference, I sound like Plucky again, he is driving dozens of species out of business at a rapid rate. Everything happens faster these days. Sometime I will explain to you why that is. In the meantime, how do we know that man's actions and their seemingly dire results aren't rhythmic? Aren't just another ordained manifestation of the universal ebb and flow. We know because my finer instincts tell me they are not. You yourself determine that the lifespan of an individual butterfly is precisely the right length. By extension, wouldn't that determinant also apply to the lifespan of a species? Amanda flushed, but not much. My magician, if you hope to embarrass me by calling attention to my contradictions, forget it. I was unenlightened enough at one time to believe in the finality of death. I'm not naive enough now to believe in the finality of extinction, except on a purely formal level. You've been close enough to the source to have learned that beings never really go extinct. Their forms may become obsolete, but their essential energies are eternal. The only thing that ever disappears is the shape of energy. Long after the visible, recognizable garter snake has vanished, its energy will hang on. Note, Marx Marvelous, who was later to argue mightily with many of the Ziller's mystic pronouncements, would have to concur with Amanda's foregoing statement, for it has scientific basis. As the German biologist Ernst Haeckel established, no particle of living energy is ever extinguished, no particle is ever created anew. Dinosaurs are still with us in the form of energy. There may be some dinosaur energy in you. There is plenty of saber-toothed tiger energy around, and trilobite energy. I ran into some woolly mammoth energy just the other day. So, my son, what we would be preserving would be merely shapes, containers as it were. Although the containers themselves are composed of energy, are intrinsic and substantial and interwoven communications of energy and do not merely hold it as a jug holds milk. Moreover, the physical appearance of these containers is beautiful. The design, the color, the functions of sensation and the movement, the sense of action and discernible psychic life. In a way, our zoo of endangered species would be like a museum, but a museum of full containers rather than of empty ones, as is usually the case. A museum of living shapes that perhaps have outlived their function. Therefore, a museum outside of time. Above time, above death, therefore a poetics. Ziller put his drum back upon its stand. Well, he said eventually, your proposal is certainly a reasonable alternative. Let's sleep on it, as they say. He snuggled down in the covers as Amanda pattered into her sanctuary to blow out the candle. He smiled his wily bushman smile. It might be nice being the nearly extinct San Francisco Garter State capital of the world, he said. The postcard was there, waiting, marking time, when the Zillers got back from the mountains. With things shaping up at the cafe, Mom's Little Dixie had been transformed inside and out. They were free to invest a cloudy morning in the pursuit of edible and or visually pleasing fungi. So they had driven up the river road, singing ancient prehistoric songs of their own invention in order to attract the mushrooms. And on the lower slopes of Mount Baker, still singing, filled with knapsacks with chanterelles. Driving home, they were tired and let the river do the singing. The moment they returned, Amanda hurried into the kitchen and poured the mushrooms into the sink. It would take a while to scrub off the dirt and fir needles, and the whole family was awash with hunger. John Paul tarried behind to look in the mailbox. The postcard was waiting, marking time. It was an old postcard, luridly colored, depicting in a clumsy and exact, touched-up photographic rendering a sawmill of certain regional fame. Blurry little workmen in bib overalls had dropped their axes and were lined up on a prized log beside the steaming donkey. They were combed and smiling, we assumed, for an insistent cameraman who had reproduced them no larger than gnats. It was a scruffy dog-piss postcard of the postcard rack of broken dreams. The postmark, which could have been Throbbing Wallet, Idaho, or Nouveau Rat's Breath, Minnesota, was in fact Aberdeen, Washington. The card was addressed to John Paul Ziller. Dear Ziller, guess I missed the circus, but I've had a show of my own. Oh boy. What has happened to me in the past couple weeks is so weird, even a far-out cat like you wouldn't believe it. So I guess I won't bother to go into detail. Pray for me. Love to your old lady. Scooby-Doo, PP. The chanterelle mushroom is a ruffled yellow trumpet. Raw, it smells like apricots. Fried in batter, it smells like breaded kidney but tastes like eggs poached in wood smoke and wine and has the consistency of fowl. Moncol preferred them raw. Baby Thor wouldn't eat them at all. Amanda and John Paul, whose ecstatic appetites underscored their animal unanimity with the ways of the world, ate them fried in batter and ate them well. "Oh my," said John Paul, rubbing his belly. "Oh my," said Amanda, rubbing hers. They stretched out on some cushions and had a pipe of hash. For the first time in that pregnancy, Amanda felt motion in her womb. It wasn't the centrally located, coherent movement that a small animal would make were it to turn in its burrow, but a many places at once, stirring such as a flight of swallows would make in torpid air. "What are you smiling at?" asked John Paul. "The mushrooms have startled the swallow," she said. Then, after a languid interlude during which Thor and Moncol fell asleep, Amanda asked, "What do you make of Plucky's postcard?" "It will have to do. Well, at least he's alive. We can assume that. And he isn't locked up. Presumably, although there's little in his message to warrant such a presumption." "When do you suppose we'll hear more from him?" Amanda was sliding into a dream as lurid as the tones of Purcell's card. "I haven't a notion. It could be quite a long time." It wasn't. A letter arrived the following day. The magician was at work on his magical thing. Sprawled upon a pallet of skins, he attended to his maps, charting a course with feathers and inks and wooden calipers. Unlike poor Rand McNally, Ziller was not obliged to limit his cartograms to representations of the Earth's familiar surface. No, his maps could, and did, indulge in languorous luxuriation, in psychocosmic ornament that may or may not be helpful to motorists seeking the most convenient route from there to here. If with appropriate geographical symbols they indicated the presence of mountain ranges, forests, and bodies of water, they seemed also to indicate psychological nuances, regional flavors, genitourinary reactions, and extrasensory phenomena, those, quote, other dimensions, end quote, a voyage so well known to the aware traveler. His charts had the look of embellished musical compositions. Perhaps they were. The London Philharmonic Orchestra will now perform Map of the Lower Congo by John Paul Ziller. Scale, 3/4 of an inch to the mile. Amanda knocked 4 times before getting his attention. He received her at his sanctuary door. "A letter," she announced, holding it aloft, a pudgy one. Its postmarked, "Hump Tulips, Washington." "They've got to be kidding. Do you think it could be from Purcell?" "What other penman among our acquaintances offends the eye with such nasty scrawls?" asked Ziller. Checking the cacography that rampaged across the envelope, they took the missive into the living room and slid it open with an ivory blade. "Dear Ziller and Yummy Bride, hello, I decided to give you the details after all. I've got to tell somebody, and there's no cat I can trust more than you, blush. Trust not only to keep my secret, but to take it in stride. Dig this. I am now a monk. That is, I am living in a monastery where the inmates believe me to be one of their own order. Don't laugh, you bastard, this is serious. There is no ordinary bunch of monks. Oh no, far from it. They are Christian, all right. Roman Catholics. But, dig this, they are spies and killers. Am I getting through to you? Look, I have unwittingly infiltrated a secret order of militant Catholic monks that serves the Vatican as a combination CIA and Green Beret unit. No, I haven't freaked out. I'm not high on anything. I'm laying it on you straight, baby, the truth if I ever told it. And may Tijuana donkeys eat the man who says that Purcell lies. My desk at the moment is a stump in the woods, which is why my handwriting is more grotesque than usual. And if they should catch me corresponding with you, it would be murder in the most awful, literal sense of the word. Guess I'd better start from the beginning, pardon my originality, and tell you how this all came about. It happened so unexpectedly that I've hardly been able to assimilate it myself. The last weekend in September, it was just about a month ago, the circus was performing in Seattle that weekend. I read about the hassle with the city council and the cops, by the way. What an uptight town that Seattle must be. And I was planning to scoot up to see you guys. The bus developed a bad cough on Friday morning, however, and I admitted it to the VW clinic in Aberdeen. I suspect you are right, Ziller, about the sausage being the ultimate triumph of Germanic technology. God knows I've never had the problem with a weenie that I've had with that bus. Anyways, I was in a mood to rationalize. It's just as well, I said to myself. I'll wait and catch the show in Bellingham at the final performance. Probably be a better party. There I was, stuck in the bunkhouse, some 10 miles northwest of town. Nothing to read, but some old Zane Grey paperbacks. And not so much as a faint sniff or scratch, pardon me, Amanda, if you are looking on, is the air. So, on Saturday morning, I decided to take a sort of busman's holiday. As if I don't spend enough time in the woods, I decide to hike up a ways into the Olympics Camp Bee Tree and steal some honey. It's different being alone in the woods. No power saw giving the sky a toothache. No dumbass loggers constantly telling me how many miles their Mustangs get to the gallon of gas. I hitched a ride to Hump Tulips. There's really such a place. Ziller, what quaint names you Washingtonians bestow upon your villages. Hump Tulips reminded me that I've always been crazy to do a Dutch girl. You know, well-scrubbed blonde bangs, china blue eyes, apple cheeks, little cunt that smells like a Gouda cheese. She'd have nothing on but wooden shoes and a crushed tulip behind her ears. No kidding. I get an erection every time I pass a Gouda cheese in the supermarket. But I digress, and believe me, there's precious little time for the digression. From Hump Tulips, I follow a silver-green finger of valley, hiking eastward toward the Wainuchi River. Eventually, the valley peters out, and I'm on a deep, rutted logging road. The terrain getting a bit steep, and the timber tall and thick, and murmuring to me in 6 dialects of Gothic. It's mid-afternoon, and I haven't gone too far, maybe 9 or 10 miles from good old Hump Tulips, when I spot some mushrooms in the woods to my left. Now, I have nibbled the sacred mushrooms of Mexico. That was a snack I'll be a long time forgetting. And I've sucked up my share of buttons with steak. But I am no mycophile, and I wouldn't know an agaricus from an asparagus. But these toadstools fascinate me, nonetheless. They look like the kind that little men with green hats sit around on. So brimming with botanical curiosity, I dropped down on my knees for a closer look. Well, have you ever seen a mushroom with 5 fingers? Oh, nature is rich, and there are strange flora and fauna riding on this spaceship of ours. But no one of those fingers has a gold ring on it, or even Mother Nature doesn't pull stunts like that. If you guessed that I had found a human hand, you win a Girl Scout cookie. If you guessed that that human hand was connected to an arm, which in turn was attached to a body, you win a Girl Scout with a merit badge for dialects. And if you guessed that that body was dead, congratulations. You win all the Girl Scouts west of the Mississippi. Old Plucky's luck. Out for a weekend of contemplation in the deep woods, he finds a corpse in a mushroom patch. It was a fresh corpse, too, still warm. There were no signs of violence on it or about it, so I wasn't particularly scared. The cadaver was male, dressed in a wool-plaid shirt and khaki hunter's trousers, boots, pair of powerful binoculars hanging about the neck. First thing I do is check for identification. He's not carrying a wallet. Has he been robbed? I wonder. And experience a little ding of fear. For if he has, the culprit could not be far away. But no, he has a wad of bread in his pants pocket, about $300. I'm breathing easier. Then I see the bulge under his shirt, and investigating, I find some official-looking papers, folded and sealed. Typed on the outside of the packet is the name, Brother Dallas FS. That's all, no address. I don't break the seal. About that time, I noticed a satchel, a brown leather valise, laying in the moss about 4 feet from the body. It's locked, but dead man has the key in his pocket, and in a wink, I've got it open. The contents don't exactly set my thyroid to pumping. Men's toilet articles, underwear, dark socks, a pair of nondescript black shoes that could have shod any small-time insurance salesman in America. There is a road map of Washington, Oregon, and a Catholic prayer book. Aside from that, just one more item, a long, heavy silken robe as black as blood. Still no identification. What to do? He is a big cat, and I am not about to lug him back to Hump Tulips. Best thing I could decide is to skip on back home and notify the town marshal or the state patrol. Although the idea of getting involved with the pigs doesn't have me tittering with delight. I re-shoulder my pack and am in the process of splitting when what to my wondering eyes doth appear but a path. It's about 30 feet from me, leading off from the logging road into the woods, and it not only is a well-worn path, it is lined with stones. It has an air of permanence and use, and on a hunt supported by my reluctance to hike to Hump Tulips for a chat with the heat, I take it. Now, I'm only a short way up that trail when it occurs to me that I am carrying Dead Man's satchel. But what the hell? I can see no harm in it, and that path is luring me on like it's a siren song, and I'm the seven seas' horniest sailor. In a flash, a baby, it was a flash, I'm doing a huge clearing and squatting in the center of said clearing, just as cool and calm as Cleopatra on the royal pot is a fort. Well, anyway, it looks like a fort. It's made of logs with 10-foot fence of sharpened poles surrounding it, and if the gates had suddenly flung open and John Wayne had led the 9th Regimental U.S. Cavalry out in a thundering charge, I scarcely would have blinked. But Colonel John is in Beverly Hills voting the conservative ticket, and the gates are formidably shut, and by this time I see a sign that reads, Wildcat Creek Monastery, Catholic Society of the Felicitator. Sorry, no visitors. Let me set it straight for you. This monetary fort is no more than a couple of football fields from the logging road and less than 2.5 football fields from where Dead Man is lying, all tuckered out. My steel-trap mind is snapping on connections. Brother Dallas, Black Robe, Monastery. Dead Man is affiliated with the monastery. Eureka! I don't have to walk to Hump Tulips. Here, the logical place to report the cadaver. I'm wondering if they have a lost and found department. Anybody here misplace a slightly used monk? For about 5 minutes I've been standing at the edge of the clearing, staring at that monastery which is silent except for some low, steady rumbling inside. Like that monastery is the world's biggest all-log rustic refrigerator. When suddenly, yipes, there's a hand on my shoulder. A very much alive hand. A hard hand, and I find myself in between two enormous gentlemen who are standing very close to me, but withholding any outward signs of affection. That handhold is no caress. I react instinctively, for experience has taught me 'tis best, and back-swing my left arm fast in an arc. A lovely Yokohama chop that knocks the seeds out of the recipient's Adam's apple. As he bends in gurgling pain, I follow through with a rabbit's chop to the back of the neck, and thud, he topples. I whirl to the man on my right, only I don't swing at him because he's holding a cocked .38 special, and it's pointing impolitely at my navel. For the first time, I notice that the men, the one on the ground and the one putting my vital organs in jeopardy, are attired in blood-black robes. Robes? I glance at my feet, for in my impetuous act of self-defense, I had hurled dead man's satchel to the ground, and his robe has spilled out and is curled there in the ferns like the small intestine of a dragon. The gunman stares at the robe also, and he looks at his buddy, whom karate has cut down in his prime. And he says to me in a low, chilly voice, like he was that log refrigerator talking, "I suppose you are Brother Dallas. Why in Mary's name didn't you identify yourself?" And yours truly, either because I am a genius of the magnitude of John Paul Ziller, or because hereditary brain syphilis, a common malady among Southern aristocrats, has left me an imbecile of indescribable deficiency. I don't tell the man. Your brother Dallas is a bit indisposed and could use any old last rites you happen to have handy. I don't say that. I say instead, you startled me. How do you expect a man to identify himself when you creep up on him like that? And the gunman says, I guess you're right, but you aroused suspicion. Why didn't you go directly to the gate and ring the bell as you were instructed? Better let me see your papers. Do I panic? Yes, I nearly shit little green apples. The good monk isn't pointing the .38 at me any longer, but he hasn't put it away either. My cool doesn't blow either. I start fumbling around in my pockets, scratching myself wildly like a Mon-Cull, and I blurt out to him, "Oh my God, they must have fallen out of my shirt back there when I bent over to look at some mushrooms. It's just a little ways down the path. I had 'em just a second ago." I take off my pack and set it down to help mitigate suspicion and start to back down the trail. I'll run, get them. Won't take a minute. He's looking at me like I'm full of the year, and he keeps repeating incredulously, "Mushrooms? Mushrooms?" He makes a move to accompany me, but I say, "You better attend to the brother there. He may be seriously hurt." And indeed, the poor dude is writhing and moaning in a semi-conscious state. So, the big gun brother, he kneels to examine his pal, and old Plucky, he zips back down the path. Man, his boots were made for walking. Hum tulips, I hear you calling. Hum tulips never sounded better. Hum tulips sounds like it is Papite Tahiti or the French Riviera. Oh, hum tulips. Shimmering pearl of the Mediterranean. I love thee, hum tulips, even though there is no one Dutch girl in thy whole domain. Yes, my first impulse is to run for it, and as you know, I am a dedicated follower of the impulse. By the time I reach the logging road, however, newer and stronger impulses have eclipsed the initial ones. The secondary impulses do not advise retreat. Quite the contrary, they say, advance. And after a moment's reflection, I realize that I am going to return to that strange silent monastery with its armed monks. That I am going to return there and hold it. Just heard something, excuse me. Now I'm back. It was deer. 2 doe and a buck. Beautiful things. Wow, spooked me. In fact, I'm too spooked to continue this narrative. My thought train has been derailed. I've been gone more than an hour, so I'd best get back to the monastery. At the first opportunity, I'll write again and extend my tale. Please pardon the raw prose style of this epistle, but there was just no time for literary embellishment. Here's to your health and happiness, chum. Pray for peace, and do not try to contact me. Signed, Plucky P., the only white man the natives trust.